All right, guys, so we are going to get started. I'm recording this session so that we've got a record. All right, welcome. Okay, so today this is going to be our delivery lecture. My name's Rebecca Lane, and I'm teaching one of the sections of public speaking online here at Full Sail. And we're going to go through the basics of public speaking delivery. So you know that we are looking at modern public speaking delivery. So the stuff that I'm asking you to do is not going to be it's not going to be super formal, but it is going to be our goal here is going to be to create conversational presentation. And when we're looking at conversational presentation, it's going to be whether you're speaking to a camera or whether you're actually speaking to people and looking at eyeballs and stuff like that, you're going for the same effect. That effect where it feels like you're actually having a conversation. So those of you in the archive video, you're not actually going to be able to see me right now, but those of you who are at the GoToMeeting right now, you should be able to see me. Can you? By the way, I do ask questions periodically throughout the lecture. And so what that means is that I usually wait for you guys to answer me. So be ready to answer questions. All right. Hey, Gunnar, the reason they can't see me in the archive is because the GoToMeeting archive feature doesn't seem to record the video camera. So I don't know why it doesn't do that, but it doesn't. So we're going to go ahead and get started. The first thing I want to talk about are 4 modes of delivery. So the 4 modes of delivery, yeah, I know, right? The 4 modes of delivery refer to the kind of preparation and the way that you are delivering your speech. So we're going to start out with impromptu. Does anybody know what impromptu speaking is? And those of you in the archive video, start to think about what you think impromptu speaking is. Gunnar Larson says unplanned. Absolutely, Gunnar. So impromptu speaking is when you haven't planned, you haven't rehearsed, and it's off the cuff. Off the cuff with just a little bit of preparation. So sometimes you end up doing impromptu speaking from notes, but usually, but that would be if you had written those notes on a napkin like 5 minutes before you were speaking, right? So impromptu speaking, it's off the cuff, just a little bit of preparation. So where do you think you see impromptu speaking in real life? Can anybody think of like real life situations where you might be asked to speak without having been prepared to speak? Anybody? Vincent, absolutely. At a wedding. Definitely. So, you ever been in that situation where you're sitting at the table and somebody says, "Hey, you know the bride or the groom really well. Why don't you tell us the story about them?" Okay. Gunnar, that's exactly what you're going to say. Awesome. Or have you ever been in a business meeting where somebody's like, "Hey, Bob had a great idea for this project. Hey, Bob, tell everybody about your project." Same kind of a thing. And so that would be impromptu, unplanned, off the cuff, with little preparation. So the next type of delivery mode would be manuscript. What do you think manuscript speaking is? Think about it. Imagine it in your head. Those of you who are here with me right now, go ahead and type it out in the chat box. What do you think? Gunnar, you're off to a good start, but that, Gunnar says flashcard types of speeches. Okay, so that is close, but that actually applies to a different kind. Kev says courtroom. Okay, so courtroom might be closer. So manuscript, look at the image that you're seeing right now. Right now you're seeing a person with a book. So Gunnar, yes, reading out loud. So a manuscript speech is when you are actually reading your speech verbatim, word for word, from a document. So where do you think we see manuscript speeches happen in real life? Those of you in the online archive, imagine. You can write this out. You can think about it. Vincent says in a presidential speech, yes, in presidential speeches, in a lot of political speeches, we absolutely see manuscript speeches. So what do you think is an advantage? Why might I want to use a manuscript speech? What's the purpose of using a manuscript speech? What do you think? What's the advantage? Tiffany says, reciting different types of oaths to avoid potential confusion. Okay, sure. Yeah. So those might be some reasons, but the really specific reason we are going to use a manuscript speech is if I need to get the words exactly correct. If I need to get the words exactly right. Also, if I haven't had time to memorize something or I haven't had time to practice. So those are some reasons we might want to use manuscript speech. We also see manuscript speeches in on the news because newscasters use teleprompters, right? Another really great reason to use a manuscript speech is if you know that you've got an exact speech, but the details might change. So that will help. That's one of the reasons newscasters, because it happens so quickly, they don't have time to practice, and the details sometimes change. Okay, so a manuscript speech is written and it's read out loud. We also can have memorized speeches. So what do you think of memorized speeches? Where do we see memorized speeches in real life? What do you think? Definitely. We sometimes see, Jack says we sometimes see them in a wedding toast. We sometimes see them, Gunnar sees them at his job, school presentations, plays. Definitely. So sometimes people want to get the words exactly right, but they want to make sure that it doesn't necessarily look like they are reading it. So what's the advantage of a memorized speech? What's the advantage? And at the same time, what's a disadvantage of a memorized speech? So what's the advantage of a memorized speech? What's the disadvantage? Okay, so Vincent says that maybe you get some more emotion. Kevin says you can always go back to it. Gunnar says the disadvantage, it might sound stale, it might sound robotic. Absolutely. So here's the deal. If you want to get the words exactly right, a memorized speech can work for you, especially if you want to make a little bit more connection. Now, the problem with memorized speeches is that if you're not a trained actor, what happens is sometimes people will memorize the inflection and the delivery when they memorize the words. The consequence of doing that is when you say it out loud in real time, sometimes the inflection doesn't match the moment because you already memorized the inflection with the words. So memorizing, unless you are a trained professional, isn't really the best idea. Also, something that will happen with memorized is if somebody asks you questions or if you lose your place halfway through, you may not have the ability to actually get back on track. So memorizing can be a little bit dangerous, especially for some longer presentations. So the fourth mode of delivery is extemporaneous speaking. So what do you think extemporaneous speaking is? So when I think about extemporaneous speaking, I think about it as a combination of impromptu speaking, of memorized speaking, and of manuscript speaking. So what might that mean? What do you think? Gunnar, absolutely. Gunnar says, is this the flashcard one? Yes, it is. Gunnar says, you know the material, but you kind of wing it. Yes. So an extemporaneous speech means that you have written the structure out, you've got note cards that remind you what the structure is, and then you follow that structure, but you don't memorize anything verbatim. You don't memorize anything verbatim, and you have the freedom to change up the structure if your audience needs you to do so, or if your time tends to be cut or something like that. Okay, so these are the four modes of delivery. So now I want to talk specifically about some delivery terms. So I'm going to give you some quick definitions. And those of you watching the archive, I've been asking questions, and I ask questions on purpose to help you start to think. When I am asking a specific question that you need to turn in, I will make a big deal about it, I promise. Okay, so delivery terms. You'll want to write these down just for your own purposes. So first we have non-fluencies. Non-fluencies, these are vocal tics, they replace pauses in speech. So you've got these examples, Sometimes people will tell you that you need to completely eliminate non-fluencies. And I'm going to disagree with him there. What I say about non-fluencies is it's okay as long as they don't become a pattern. The thing with anything that people warn you against in public speaking is usually it comes down to being able to connect with people. So if something gets in the way of the meaning, or if it gets in the way of the connection, then that's something that people will advise you against. So non-fluencies, in general, they're okay, as long as they don't become a pattern, as long as they don't become distracting. Okay, so the next word, we've got verbal fillers. So verbal fillers, they're kind of like non-fluencies, you know, like such as, basically, whenever you're thinking about public speaking. Now, this is true in the online environment too, especially when you're doing your speeches in front of your live audience. Proxemics talks about your use of space. So how close are you? Now, in this kind of an environment, in the online video chat environment, that can apply too. So if I lean forward, I'm a little bit closer. If I lean back, I'm a little bit farther away. Both of these postures are going to make you react differently to the way you perceive me, right? When you're actually on your feet, you can still use this. We usually think of it in like a triangle formation. So you've got your spot in the center right here, and you've got the spot forward to the right and the spot forward to the left. And each of those positions makes the audience react a little bit differently to you. Now, as we go through these delivery terms, what I want you to do is I want you to think about your experience as an audience member. So it's less about, at this exact moment, it's less about how you want to be. I want you to think about people that you have seen speak in the past. So we also have pronunciation. That's another delivery term. So this is a measurement that refers to the way that you say things. So for example, pronunciation, it could be when you look at Webster's dictionary. Webster's dictionary will tell you how to say things. I had a teacher who used to say emphasis on the wrong syllable. So what's your pronunciation? When we think about pronunciation, I also want you to think about what happens when you pronounce a word wrong. So if you're speaking to a bunch of experts and you pronounce a word wrong, and you're supposed to also be a credible expert on that subject, what does that do to your credibility? What do you guys think out there in Chatbox world? Vincent says it hurts it. How come? Gunnar says pow, right in the kisser. All right, how come? Why? We're talking about how mispronouncing words might affect your credibility as a speaker. Gunnar says, because it makes you seem like you know less about what you're talking about. Absolutely. Yes. So if I mispronounce a word, that means that I might not be in with the culture. It means I might not really know what I'm talking about. And it really does hurt my credibility. So we also want to think about articulation. So this refers to how crisp your words are, how clear your words are. So articulation comes down to how you pronounce consonants. We're going to talk about this a little bit later, but it's how you pronounce your consonants. So we're also going to talk about projection. Projection is the act of booming your voice across the speaking forum, making sure you're reaching the people in the back. Now, one of the things that I see people do in video chat a lot is they speak like they're in their bedroom. So if I'm speaking to you like I'm in my bedroom, well, you know, I might get up close to the mic and I might speak kind of softly because I don't really want people to hear me. And so I might be close to the mic, so my volume might be okay, but do you notice how the timbre of my voice has changed? So when you are speaking in a formal way, you want to make sure you're projecting like you're projecting to a room. So right now I changed my voice, and right now I'm speaking like I would speak to my classroom. And it changes a lot of things, right? I mean, it changes the way that I'm saying my words, but it also changes the tone and stuff like that. So when you're thinking about projection, and you're even thinking about video chat, you want to make sure that you are projecting like you would to a room, because we can tell the difference. All right. You also want to think about volume. And volume and projection are two totally different things. One of the things that I will talk about a lot in this class is about creating variation. Especially you guys online, you have one assignment that is all voiceover. You want to make sure that you have a lot of vocal variation, and volume is one of those things that you have a lot of control over. So when I talk about volume, I'm really talking about music. So those of you out there in chat world, when I talk about volume in music, does anybody know what the technical term for that is? What is the musical term that refers to changing volume? Okay, gain. Okay, yes, that would be a technical term with gear. Crescendo, diminuendo. Yes, Gunnar, thank you so much. Yeah, so crescendo, diminuendo, that's dynamics, right? So volume refers to changing up your dynamics. So as a speaker, I have the ability to speak louder, I have the ability to speak softer, and all of those change how you as an audience react to me. So think about that. We also want to think about gestures. Now, gestures, a lot of times when people talk about gestures, you're like, I don't know what to do with my hands. I just don't know what to do. Watch yourself speak. What I recommend is go ahead and have a conversation with a friend. Videotape that conversation. Try to forget that you've got the camera there at all. And watch that video later and see what you do with your hands. And I think that you will find that you're using hands really naturally, right? Try to mimic that in your speeches. But I want to put one condition on that. So when we're making things more formal, we have a little bit less movement than we might if we were just talking to our friends. So if I'm talking to my friends, I probably have big gestures and I'm probably like moving my body around and like going from side to side and stuff like that, and that's cool, but that's really casual. When we make things a little more formal, we use fewer gestures, we stand up a little bit straighter, and we keep a little bit more stillness here. Think about that. But it's the same concept of gesture. All right, moving forward. I also want you to think about continuous eye contact. So continuous eye contact, oh, and my battery is running out. So you guys are going to have to hold on just a second. I'm going to get my plug. This happens sometimes. I have an excellent assistant here. I had it plugged in right here, and I forgot to plug it in. Fail. All right, continuing. Okay, so we're talking about continuous eye contact. So continuous eye contact, it's about maintaining this comfortable eye contact with your audience. So I'm not talking about staring us down, but, well, and honestly, in the video chat world, it kind of does feel like staring people down, I gotta say. But ideally, you don't want to stare people down, but you want to make sure they feel like you've seen them. My screen is not clear. Okay, thank you so much. So, we're going to try something really quick. Hey, Kev, is it better? Has this cleared up the screen? Excellent. All right. You thought eye contact was some kind of a pun? No, no, no. Continuous eye contact. All right, so that's continuous eye contact. So now we're going to move on to the other delivery lecture. So we've got some basic vocabulary words, and that's really good. And all of these vocabulary words help add up to being a dynamic speaker. Now, those of you who are watching the archive, the questions are going to start being voiced now. So start to listen for the questions that you will need to answer. So when I think about dynamism, dynamism is referring to being dynamic. So that quality of being dynamic. And when we think about being dynamic, I think of it as the speaker's tool belt. So what I'm going to go through right now are the tools that you can use to achieve some level of of dynamism, to achieve some level of charisma. So speakers that we consider charismatic would also be speakers that we would consider dynamic. All right. So here are some things that we have in the tool belt. The very first basis of speaking comes with your breath. Why do you think that is? Think about how your voice is made, right? So think about the basic anatomy. What happens to give us vocalization? So the first thing that happens is our vocal cords vibrate, right? So our vocal cords are vibrating against each other. But that can't happen unless we have what? Unless we have breath. So breath passes through the vocal cords, causes them to vibrate, and causes that sound to happen. Okay, great. So if you've ever played a wind instrument, you're going to understand what this is. So when you sing or when you play a wind instrument, what people teach you to do is they teach you to breathe from the diaphragm. So what I'd like you to do right now is I want you to take your belly, take your hand, and I want you to put it on your belly. The second thing that I want you to do is take your other hand and put it on your chest. So what I'd like you to do right now is take a deep breath in. Do not breathe into the hand on your stomach. Do breathe into the hand on your chest. And I want you to take a deep breath, lift your shoulders all the way up, and blow out like this for as long as you can hold it. And I want you to breathe out really as long as you can go. And I want you to count. So 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000, however long you can breathe this out. Okay? Now I want you to do one more thing. This next breath that you take, keep your hand on your belly and your hand on your chest. This time, do not move your shoulders at all. I want you to press your shoulders all the way down to the ground. But I want you to breathe into your belly, your hand on your belly, and make your belly as big as possible. Make sure that breath goes all the way down into your belly. Fill it up. And I want you to do the same thing. So breathe out as long as you can possibly breathe out. And I want you to count 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, that same pace that you were breathing out the first time. So what's the difference between breathing into just your shoulders and breathing into just your belly? Does anybody notice a difference? Vincent says that he's able to control his breath. Vincent, which one are you able to control your breath on? Oh, you're able to control it on your chest. Okay. Interesting. Gunner's able to control it with his diaphragm. When you release it from your stomach, it just flows right out. Okay, and so it's possible it'll take a little bit of practice. Because what happens is your diaphragm is a muscle that rests right under your lungs. And it kind of helps your lungs work like a bagpipe. So it presses your breath up. So it helps you control the pace at which your breath goes out. So as a singer, this is incredibly important. As a wind instrumentalist, it's really hugely important. But as a speaker, it makes a big difference too. And one of the things this does when you're a speaker is it takes the pressure off of your throat. So if I tense up my throat, that means I'm tensing up my vocal cords. If I tense up my vocal cords, that means that they're not moving quite as freely. If my vocal cords don't move quite as freely, they're more likely to chafe against each other. And that's what happens like when you lose your voice. They swell up and they can't vibrate quite as well. So this is a little bit of vocal health, and it's a little bit of achieving the dynamics. So being able to be louder and being able to be softer without putting any tension on your throat right here. It gives you a lot more control. All right, so breath, your very first tool. The next tool you have to be a dynamic speaker is you want to make sure you're working for projection. So with projection, we're thinking of your resonance chambers. So think about a guitar really quick. So we've got an electric guitar and we've got an acoustic guitar. What is the difference in the way that they look? I want you to visualize that right now. Those of you in chat box world, you can go ahead and say it for me. What's the difference between an electric guitar and an acoustic guitar? You're probably thinking an electric guitar is just a piece of plywood, right? Absolutely. And Gunnar says the acoustic guitar is hollow. Yes. So the difference is the electric guitar does not have a resonance chamber, and the acoustic guitar does. So the cool thing about the human body is we actually have resonance chambers built in. So you want to make sure that you're focusing the sound into your resonance chambers. And one of those resonance chambers that we have is our mask. And so those are our nasal passages right here. You'll notice that when you have a cold or your sinuses are stuffy, your voice sounds a little bit different. It sounds a little bit muffled. And it's that same kind of thing that's happening. So if we want to project our voice, we want to make sure that our sound is going into our mask so that we can focus that and it'll hit the back of the room. So if we really want to project, we combine our resonance chambers plus our breath to shoot our voice to the back of the room. If you are missing either of those components, projection will not happen as effectively. It makes a huge difference. All right. So we're going to talk more about eye contact. So the slide says it's your first contact with the audience. Cool. Absolutely. Makes a huge difference. But I want you to think about it. So those of you who can see me, I'm going to make a change. Those of you who can't see me, the change that I have made is I have stopped looking at the camera. So when I stop looking at the camera, it may or may not change what your experience is. So those of you in chat, what is the difference now that I'm not looking at the camera? I'm looking at a lot of different places. I've looked to my left. I've looked to my right. I'm looking at the computer screen right now. What's the difference in your experience as an audience member? Okay, so one of the things that I'm seeing is Vincent says, Gunnar says, now I'm just acting. Vincent says, your attention doesn't seem to be directed at us, even though you're speaking to us. All right. So, and Kevin says it doesn't even feel like we have contact. That's the difference. If I look at you, it feels like I'm talking to you. If I don't look at you, it doesn't feel like I'm talking to you. Now, what happens when we're talking to a camera is you have to look directly into the camera in order for it to feel like you're talking to your audience. So I'm looking really directly at the little green light beside the camera at the top of my screen. When I shift my eyes at all, you guys can tell. It's a really tiny gesture, but it makes a huge difference. Okay, so this is question number 1 that you guys in chat box, or you guys in the archive video, and also you guys in the chat box world, this is question number 1. You should write this down that you need to know. What is the rule for eye contact? The rule for eye contact is, I recommend looking your audience in the eyeballs 95% of the time. That other 5%, you can look at your notes. You might glance at the screen. You can look to the side. It doesn't really matter. But 95% of the time, you need to be making direct eye contact with your audience. So, question number 1, what is the rule for eye contact? The rule for eye contact is you need to look at your audience 95% of the time. Okay, that's the first thing you need to write down for your GoToMeeting test. Okay, moving forward. Now we're going to talk about expression. We want to make sure that you're speaking with your face, that you're emoting. So one of the things that happens when we're trying to be professional, when we're trying to look like we know what we're doing, is we clamp down. And so we lose vocal variation, we lose facial expression. Sometimes we tense up, so we tighten all of our muscles, and so we lose body movement. And then we put our hands, we clasp our hands, and so we move hand gestures. And all of that works together to make us not very friendly and not very exciting at all. I've just gotten very serious. and not very interesting to watch. Okay. The thing that allows you to connect with people, well, A is breath. That's the very first thing we talked about. But it's also allowing yourself to be expressive. What that means is you need to allow your facial expressions to match the words that you're saying. What this also means is that if you are saying something serious, you need to make sure that your face matches that serious. If you're talking about a sensitive subject matter, make sure that your vocal tone reflects that. Okay, moving forward. Whoops. I went too fast. Fail. So the next slide talks about inflection. So those of you who are in the archive video and those of you who are writing down questions in the live lecture, this is your next question. And you'll be answering this question throughout the rest of these parts. Name the 6 components of vocal variety. So question number 2, name the 6 components of vocal variety. So component number 1 is inflection. So when we're talking about inflection, this refers to our pitch. It refers to what pitches am I using? So if I'm going to ask a question, a lot of time my inflection is going to go up. Do you hear that? Did I ask a question? Or if I'm really sure, if I'm making a really confident statement, my inflection will go down. Do you see how sure I sound? I sound confident. This is correct. And my inflection went down. Now, our inflection doesn't just go down at the beginning of our sentence or the end of our sentence. We can move that inflection around throughout the sentence. And that's what makes a really interesting speaker, is we change pitch to create emphasis. That's one way. It goes back to this concept where our brains are wired to look for patterns. Once we identify the pattern, our brain goes, peace out, man. I don't have to pay attention to that anymore. I got the pattern. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we are creating enough variation in our voice that it keeps your audience's brains guessing. So the first component of vocal variation. Remember, question number 2 is, what are the 6 components of vocal variation? Component number 1 is inflection. So this is changing our pitch and changing our emphasis. So how do we make emphasis? Usually emphasis happens when we put pressure on something. So I can say something a little louder, or I can say something with a little more breath. Okay, so changing pitch and emphasis. We can also create vocal variety. Component number 2 of vocal variation is articulation. So the slide says clear pronunciation, strong use of articulators. Okay, so what are our articulators? Our articulators include your tongue, your teeth, your lips, your soft palate, your hard palate, and your throat. So what I'd like you guys to do right now is say this with me, b, d, g. Okay, 1, 2, 3. B, d, g. Okay, I'm going to give you another pattern. I want you to say p as in P, t as in T, k as in K. So b as in B, p as in, or b as in P, B, or fail, b as in B, g as in G, b, d, g, B, D, G, P, T, K. What's the difference? What articulators am I using at any of those different things? What do you think? What articulator am I using for b? B. What articulator? Vincent says lips. Absolutely. Okay. So what about d, D, What articulator? Your tongue. And it's not just your tongue, is it, Gunnar? We have two articulators working together. T, d. It's your teeth, absolutely. Well, it's kind of your teeth. It's actually a little bit behind your teeth, right? That's called your hard palate. So it's the roof of my mouth. T, d. And then we've got g, g. What articulators am I using right there? What do you think? Absolutely, Gunnar. It's your tongue and your soft palate. G. And look at this. This is really cool. I like this one. This is why I do this. But I go. What's the difference? Because we're using the same articulators for these, right? B, p, d, t, g, k. So the first set is vocalized, and the second set is not vocalized. So articulators are percussive. The way we distinguish between these percussive moments is by giving them space, by giving them breath, giving them emphasis. Okay? So when we're thinking about articulation, I have a choice. I have a choice in variety. I can choose to be very crisp in my articulation. And now it sounds a little bit fake, right? It sounds a little bit too much. But I can kind of get rid of all of those. And then it's a little bit, it's really casual, but it's really hard to understand. It's hard for me to do this, but it's really hard. It's harder to understand me, right? So you want to choose. We can use articulation for emphasis. So if you want somebody to really pay attention to something, you might not be articulating very clearly and then punch it. You know what I'm saying? Okay, cool. So, second component of vocal variation, articulation. Just in case you weren't sure, this is your hard palate. And you've got your soft palate right back here. It's the part of your voice that goes up, the part of your mouth that goes up when you yawn. So here are the rest of the components of vocal variety. We talked about inflection. We talked about articulation. Let's talk a little bit about rhythm. So rhythm gives us the ability to create a pattern. So we've been talking about not creating patterns, and I completely agree with that. But what happens? What happens if I create a pattern, and now I break the pattern, but I haven't broken the pattern yet? Broke it. Okay. So do you see how you listened when I broke the pattern? It changes the way we hear things. So something to think about. We also want to think about pacing. So pacing is something, I like to think about ebb and flow. So I can speak really fast, and that communicates one thing with my audience, speaking really fast. But if I speak fast the entire time, you're going to start to zone out. And it doesn't matter how much rhythm or how much pitch variation I've got. If I speak the same pace the entire time, you're going to lose me. So then I slow down. And that changes the way you hear me. But only if I create this variation. If I speak this pace the entire speech, you're probably going to fall asleep. So it's about mixing it up. Finding something that is fast, finding something that's slow, and breaking up whatever flow you've got going. We want to think about emphasis. We also want to think about pauses. What's the effect of a pause? How does that change the way you process the information? Gunnar makes a really good point. He says it gives the listener time to think. Yes. It's kind of like giving my brain a break. Do you want to have long pauses the entire time you're speaking? No. Everything in moderation, right? So if you have too many long pauses, it starts to sound like you've forgotten your speech. That's a problem. But if you are strategic about it, if you're on purpose about it, then that gives you time to breathe. And it gives your audience time to think about things. It makes a big difference. Okay, so those are the 6 components of vocal variety. I hope you wrote them down. All right, so next we're going to talk about movement. So here's question number 3. What is the difference between a nervous mannerism and an effective gesture? Question number 3. What is the difference between a nervous mannerism and an effective gesture? And actually, I think this is question number 4. What is the difference between a nervous mannerism and an effective gesture? Write that down, because I'm going to answer it right now. Okay. So you know that a movement is, if this is 4, you missed 3. Okay. I'll go over them at the very end of the video, too. So what's the difference between a nervous mannerism and an effective gesture? A nervous mannerism is a mannerism that does not add to the meaning of your presentation. An effective gesture adds to the words that you're saying. Now, gestures can add in a way that is really literal, like if I'm saying 1, 2, 3, or it can be something that is more emotive. Or maybe, like, sometimes you're talking about 2 different things, and so I would say this and perhaps gesture with my right hand, or that and perhaps gesture with my left hand. Now, that can all sound a little bit canned. It can be a little bit rehearsed, but the thing is that we do this in real life. So think about, what is a nervous gesture? What kind of gestures do we usually associate with people being nervous? What do you think? What kind of gestures? Vincent says playing with your fingers. Yep. Twiddling your thumbs, nail biting. What kind of gestures? Switching our eyes, absolutely. Sometimes we associate switching our eyes with nervous gestures. Playing with our hair can be a nervous gesture. If people are touching their face, that can look nervous. What else? Lip biting. What else do you think are nervous gestures? If somebody's sitting and they're shaking their leg, absolutely. Swaying, moving a lot. Okay, so all of these things and these are all suggestions that have been coming from the chat box world. Okay, so all of these gestures are things that we don't associate with the message, right? So what usually happens is people's nonverbal gestures communicate how they're feeling on the inside, and we forget about them. We've already thought a lot about our words because we're taught to think about our words, right? And then we forget to think about our nonverbal gestures. But the truth is that our nonverbals communicate exactly as much as the words that we are saying. So really excellent speakers are really intentional about the nonverbal gestures they're using, just as much as being intentional about the words that they are saying. So this next question is, what is the difference between a nervous mannerism and an effective gesture? I think that I've just said that. So those of you who are in the chat world, can you guys summarize what I just said? Can you answer that question for me? So Gunnar says, effective gestures add to the meaning of what you're saying, and nervous mannerisms distract from meaning. All right. That's exactly how I would say that. I probably said that exactly verbatim. Thank you. Okay. Moving forward. Here are some examples that we can walk through of movements that are traditionally considered distracting. So if you bring your hands, people do that a lot. Playing with loose change, keys, etc. Not only does this communicate nervousness, it also creates noise, and noise is distracting for a completely different reason. You guys have already mentioned playing with your hair. Something to be careful of, especially if you have long hair. So another thing that we want to think about when we think about our posture is we want to think about making sure that we've got open gestures. So if I cross my arms in front of me, does that change the way that you see me? Does this change the feeling you get from me? And those of you who can't see me, go ask somebody to cross their arms. What's the difference? How does this change what I'm communicating? So something as simple as I've crossed my arms right in front of my chest. The Vincent says that I'm closing myself off. Yeah, so what's the difference in the feeling you get from me? So I'm not even changing my facial expressions, but Gunnar says now I look disappointed. Okay, huge difference, right? So even though this feels really comfortable for me, love this position, feels really good, right? But something as simple as opening up my arms takes me from looking disappointed or pushing people away to something that's a little bit more friendly, a little more open, a little more approachable. So when we go through these, we've got the bear hug. So the bear hug would be crossed in front of you. It also can be grasping either side of your arms. You've got the flesh wound, turns the bear hug into a one-handed thing. The rocker, anybody who's rocking. We've also got the desk lean. Now, I see the desk lean a lot in video chat, and it makes a difference in the way that the audience sees me. If I lean on the desk, it might make me feel a little more friendly, but it also does something that you probably don't realize it's doing. Those of you who can see me, you can see that my shoulders are a little bit more slumped. Gunnar says that right now that I'm leaning on my desk, I look a little more laid back, but I also look less credible. All right, so anything that's going to slump your shoulders or make you look a little more slumpy takes away your credibility. So in this class, we're not just talking about being conversational, we're talking about being conversational and trying to speak corporate. And corporate doesn't have to be totally canned, right? But we want to look like corporate enough that corporate might give us money. That's the goal, is we want people to pay us. Okay, so the posture that communicates I can handle money is being able to sit up straight, having my shoulders back, and having open body language. All right. Ideally, we want to have some movement. And so movement comes from gestures, movement comes from our posture, movement comes from proxemics. So proxemics is easier when you are doing a live presentation. So when you record your live presentation for this class, you will be able to use proxemics. You'll be able to use movement. The same thing with movement. The same thing that is true for gestures is also true for movement. We want movement to add to the content. Gestures are small. You do that with your hands. Proxemics, moving your body within the space, that's a big movement. So you want to save those big movements for large changes in topic. So if you change from one side of the space to the other, that helps indicate that you're moving from one main point to another main point. It's really effective. If you move the entire time, that's going to make you look a little nervous, right? Because we would call that what? We call that pacing. And so if I'm pacing, it looks like I'm pretty uncomfortable. Also, what pacing does is that we've created a pattern. We've created a pattern that happens the entire time. And that means that my movement has completely lost its meaning. So it all becomes about being intentional, being on purpose. All right. And so finally, we want to think about energy. So when we are communicating to a camera, or when we're communicating to a large group of people, it's not the same as talking to a person one-on-one. You have to turn it up a notch. A little bit less so for the camera. Although camera notices small movements and makes them feel larger. When you're speaking to an audience, you end up speaking a little bit bigger. The reason you do this is because you're trying to create a connection with multiple people at the same time. And usually people are a little bit farther away from you. So in order to create that close connection to people who are farther away, you make your gestures a little bit bigger. It doesn't mean that you're being inauthentic, but it does take practice to make it feel authentic. Usually when we do things on the breath, that makes things happen a little bit more naturally. So think about that. So when we're thinking about movement, you're thinking about variety, you're thinking about pacing. So remember, the same thing with gestures, the same thing that movement is true as it is for vocal variety. We want to make sure that you're mixing it up, that you're breaking patterns and stuff like that. All right, so that's the end of the lecture. Let me review the questions one more time. The first question is, what is the rule for eye contact? The second question is, what are your articulators? The third question is, what are the 6 components of vocal variety? And the fourth question is, what is different between nervous mannerisms and effective gestures? So I'll go through those one more time. Question number 1, what is the rule for eye contact? Question number 2, what are your articulators? Question number 3, go ahead and list those out, by the way. Question number 3, list the 6 components of vocal variety. And question number 4, what is the difference between a nervous mannerism and an effective gesture? All right. So those of you who are watching the archive video, thank you so much for joining me today. And I hope that this made a difference. All right. Thank you.